Hello, ngHouston. So tonight we are going to talk, Lance is going to talk about Angular test dependency injection, which I'm actually pretty excited about. I did this, I remember some serious pain the first time I had to do this, because when I first started writing unit tests back in AngularJS, this was a subject that I really struggled with. And so I'm pretty excited about this. So Lance, you want to introduce yourself? We know who you are. You've been on the show, but I know some people might be new. So tell us who you are.
Sure. Hi, my name is Lance Finney, and while I'm doing my introduction, I'll do the little slide that advertises my company, just so everyone sees that. It's the only slide that I'm really going to be doing today. So as the slide shows, I'm with Oasis Digital. I'm also an instructor with Angular Bootcamp. I've been in the Angular space for about 4 or 5 years. Before that, I was a Java developer for about a decade. So mostly I'm a developer, but about 10–20% of the time, we also go out and teach Angular to people. So that's really it for my introduction.
All right. That's an awesome introduction. And you're super cool.
Oh, thanks.
I've been hanging out with you for a while. I feel like I've gotten to know you more in the last year or so. We've seen each other at like half a dozen conferences, and it'd be fun to hang out with. So if you see Lance, go hang out with him. It's pretty cool. And ask him Angular questions.
Yeah, I'm hoping to go to more conferences. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Okay, so you're going to teach us how to do this. I think it's gotten a lot easier now because there's like so much of it is handled with Angular. But I think sometimes when we don't know Angular or we don't know how to do it, we end up writing a lot more code than we need. So if we know how to do it properly, then it's like super clean and easy. So you're going to show us the super clean and easy method.
Well, I'm going to try. My intention here is to look at some of the tests that we have in the Angular space. And I know a problem a lot of people have when they look at the tests in Angular is just getting started, getting over the hump. So being able to look at a test and see what the basic problems are with it, and basic reasons that a test might not be succeeding, and working from there. So there is some ceremony around Angular tests that, depending upon what exactly you're testing, and so just I want to talk about how to work through that. And the framework that I'm going to use for looking at this is the Tour of Heroes. So I'm assuming that most people are familiar with Tour of Heroes, but just in case some people who are watching this aren't, Tour of Heroes is the default tutorial that the Angular team uses in their documentation to teach how to do Angular apps. And you can get to it by going to the Angular main webpage, clicking on Docs, clicking on the tutorial, and then they have an 8-step process where they take you from a blank screen to hitting a back end and everything in between. It's not really everything. There's a lot that they don't cover for more enterprise apps, but there's a lot in here. This is how you need to learn, or a good way to learn from scratch how to do Angular. And if you want to see what the Tour of Heroes app is, from the introduction page near the top, they have a live example, and that I'm opening up in a new tab that kicks us open into StackBlitz. And if we wait a few seconds, that'll show the app that's running. So this app has a main page here with a dashboard that shows some of the heroes in here. You can look at a heroes view that shows the individual heroes. There's a component for an individual hero that you can look at. You can also, from some of these views, you can do a search and oh, that's the ad, not the search. There's the search. You can search for heroes and see that. So these are some of the components that we're going to use, that we're going to look at during this talk. And really, that's the end of actually looking at the application. The details of what this application is doesn't really matter for what I want to talk about today. So now that I've shown what the application is, the other interesting thing is that there's a download link here. So back on the page in the documents, they have a download link, and you can click on that and you can download a zip file that has the actual information here. I'm kind of surprised. As far as I found, it's not available on GitHub anywhere. There is an older version of it on John Papa's GitHub, but the live up to date I haven't found on GitHub, so you can download this. And that is what I have done. So here in my Visual Studio Code, you can see what this application is. It's a standard application for Angular these days, created using the CLI. It has a few components and subcomponents, some modules. It uses the defaults of Karma and package JSON. Everything is default here that you would expect. The only thing I've done besides downloading this is I've already installed the node modules just so we don't waste the time doing that. So when I wanted to see how to do things in a lot of different things, I've often gone to the Tour of Heroes. And so at one point I decided I wanted to go to Tour of Heroes and see what it provided for tests, what the examples it gave for tests. I assumed that they would give us really good starting points for our tests from there. And so I ran the test. Now I'm going to run the command that you can run to do this, yarn run test. You can also run npm run test. It's pretty much the same thing. And this is going to take a few minutes to run. So while I'm waiting on that, I will take a quick look at package JSON just to talk about what this is actually doing behind the scenes, just to help set that up.
You know who wrote that, don't you? That Tour of Heroes testing?
No. Well,
I'm pretty sure it was Ward Bell.
Yeah, but the tests in here, there's really nothing with the test. Like Tour of Heroes overall, I was assuming it was Ward and John and a few others. Mm-hmm. But the tests, as you'll see in a few minutes, he didn't do much on the tests. But yeah,
I think maybe it was testing for Angular IO. We have an episode, one of our first episodes actually. I think it might have been the first episode where he came on and walked us through a whole bunch of like crazy unit testing in Angular, and it was beautiful. It was super advanced. He like went deep diving. It was either Angular IO. I think if Tour of Heroes doesn't have a lot of testing, then it must have been Angular IO. But it was pretty cool.
Yeah, there are very good utilities and really good libraries. And it doesn't surprise me at all that Ward Bell has some great stuff somewhere, just not right here.
Yeah.
So anyway, as I was saying, I ran yarn run test. When you say yarn run or npm run, it runs a script in your package JSON. So the test that I ran, it really just runs ng test. And this really just runs the CLI's test command. So I could have just done ng test on the command line, but I prefer to do things through yarn. What ng test, what the command line, or the CLI testing does is it invokes Karma, which is one of the few libraries, third-party libraries that comes with a CLI created application. Karma goes throughout your system, finds the test files that you have, kicks off a browser for you so that it can run them, and sets that up. And then the test itself, the content of your test is done in Jasmine. That's the default. These are not the only ways to do it. That's just the default. There are competitors. But Jasmine is the thing that provides the utilities like your assertions, expect this equals that and other things. So we're running, at least I'm running yarn to run the CLI, to run Karma, to run Jasmine. You don't really need to keep that all in mind, but it does, you kind of do. When you get deep into testing, you kind of have to know what the different pieces are eventually. And the other good thing is, thanks to the CLI, this is a lot easier than it used to be. I started working in Angular 2 back in the alphas and the betas, and back then, figuring out how to wire our tests together was a nightmare. Thanks to the CLI, the defaults are here. Things are hooked up. You can replace Jasmine with Jest. You can do other things, but perfectly workable defaults are here for us. So while I was talking, tests ran, and I will expand this. So there are 5 tests that exist in this library, and as you can see, and what was my surprise, 3 of the tests fail. So if you haven't done this before, you can click on the spec list. You can see all the tests to just say what. Basic what they should do, the file name, and then the test within them, and you can look at the individual failures.
Did it open that automatically, or did you have to open that browser?
So this browser opened automatically. It actually opened up on a different screen, so I had to bring it in. So you didn't see it at the moment that it opened up. But yeah, the Karma will automatically open a browser for you if you have it configured to. The default is to use Chrome, and it will pop up this browser. And so it provides you the information. There are other, you can do Firefox instead, you can do other browsers, you can do a headless Chrome, you can have it run all of the different browsers. It just depends what you want to be able to test. The great thing about it though is if you are targeting, if your app targets Chrome, you can have your tests run in Chrome. You can be using the exact same JavaScript, warts and all, that your application will be seeing in live. So you have it right there for you. So that's the good thing about it. A lot of people will do headless, particularly when they're running in continuous integration. But when I'm doing my day-to-day testing, I like to use the headed version just so I can see the results. Yeah. So over here on the right is the console where I ran it, and it says you can see that 3 tests failed of the 5 that ran. Same information here on the left. It's pretty much the same information between the 2 different views of it, but sometimes one is a little bit easier to parse than the other, at least for me. So now we're at the question of why did these tests fail? These are, yeah, as I said, I was really surprised to see that these tests failed. So let's go take a look at one of them. I'm going to look first at the hero search component spec.
Did these fail? You cloned the repo and it just failed right off the bat, or did you break it for us?
Only thing I downloaded the zip file. As I said, I couldn't find a GitHub for the actual repo. Don Papa has an obsolete one. I don't know where the repo is for the current version. I just downloaded the zip file from that link I showed, and the only thing I've done is it already ran yarn to install my node modules. I have not done anything else. So, but yeah, they come out of the box, only 3 of the 5 pass.
Not starting off too well, man.
Yeah. And
it's going to be okay. You're going to show us what's wrong with it?
Exactly. I'm going to show what happened here. And looking, so what I'm showing on the screen here is the, I just noticed the chat. Someone said my font is big enough. So that's excellent. Thank you. Anyway, so if you have created a component using the CLI and have used the default setting, which creates a test file for you, what I'm showing here should look familiar. What you're seeing here is the default as it's generated. So what I presume happened is when Ward Bell or whomever was creating these components for the Tour of Heroes, he created it to create these tests, and initially they passed because for the initial versions of all the components, they all pass, and services and whatever. But then later changes happened to the components and they weren't paying attention to the tests, so the tests got obsolete, they got rotten, and they started failing without anyone noticing that they had started to fail. So it's not that there's anything necessarily wrong with these, it's just that they're a little bit out of date. And so what I want to talk about for this evening is what would it take to get to the point that you could actually start doing reasonable tests with these. I'm not going to do a whole lot with actually writing tests and assertions and what you would really want to test, but just how would you get over the hump to be able to test something like this if you had some files like this that had been generated and were out of date and were failing. So hope that is interesting to your viewers. So let's get started.
Hey, and if you have time, you know it would be cool
Sure.
if you add a new service and then hook it into this. Can you do that?
Add a new service using the CLI and hook it in. I will be talking about services and how they get built and how they
Awesome.
get. So yeah, that'll definitely.
I'll just sit here and be quiet and let you.
So yeah.
Because that's where I got stuck the first time I did this. That's what I was tripping over, and I figured it out. But that's like something that if you're just trying to figure this out, that's kind of a quick one, tricky one.
Well, and a little bit of a spoiler for what's going to come up in a bit is that question has actually changed between Angular 5 and Angular 6. So,
well, it's a good thing you're here.
Yeah, so just put that nugget out there.
All right.
So one thing you can do, well, I'll talk about the structure of this test. So the way that a Jasmine test is structured is you have describe blocks, and describes basically describe what you're going to be testing. So I am testing here the hero search component, and that line there should look familiar from in here. It says hero search component should create. That text hero search component came directly from right here at the name of the describe block. You can nest your describe block. So if you want to go to narrower parts of your component or service or whatever you're testing. And so you can build these names up and they will help you find your test that's failing. The other cool thing about them is that it can help you give human readable names for your tests so that you can see why something is failing. So that's what the describe block does. That is our organizing principle. And within that, we have it blocks where we put our actual assertions. And it is a silly name, in my opinion. But the reason that I've been able to tell that it has that name is so that line 22 is human readable. It would say, what are we going to be testing here? We're going to test something about hero search component. What about it? That it should create. So it's a good idea to have names for your its that are human readable sentences that make some sense. So the describe overall is the container. We have within it the spot that we're going to do our assertions, and then we have some before eaches. We have two different sets of these. Both of these will get executed before every single one of our its runs. We only have the one it, so it only gets run once. And these are where you can do your setup and your teardown for your whole component. In our particular case, as I said, we only have one, so it's not that big a deal. We have two different before eaches because one of them does some things involving asynchronous handling and the other doesn't need it. I'm not going to, that's kind of beyond the scope of what I can get to today, but that is why there are two of these. So anyway, what I want to focus on this one test. So a nice thing you can do with Jasmine is you can put the word or the letter F in front of your describes or your its. And then when you do that, when your test runs again, only that one test runs. And you'll notice here, because of the default way that Karma is set up, and it just automatically reran the test for me, which is great. I don't have to rerun these. Like I had to buy some time earlier because of that. I don't have to waste that time anymore. Everything's compiled and it only compiles what it needs to and runs again. So now, finally, we are looking at one of our failing tests. Hero search component. All right, it is failing. Why is it failing? Because of a template parse error. So it's saying I can't bind to the router link since it's not a known property of A. All right, well, where is that problem happening? Fortunately, Angular tests are sometimes pretty good at giving you guidance at what you need to do and what you need to fix and where you need to go fix it. This error message is actually an error message that you might see in the browser doing a production app because it's really the same problem that you would see there, but you might run into it first here in the test. So this tells us exactly where to go look. So I'm going to pull up a hero search component, HTML, and yep, there it is. Line 8, we have the router link. So that's what it's complaining about. So why is there a problem for the hero search component? And why isn't this a problem in the running app? We saw the running app earlier. Well, what's happening is that, as it says in the error message, router link is an Angular thing. It's not something that's built into the anchor tag in HTML. And we haven't told our Angular what it needs to know in order to be able to do things like this. The only thing that we have set up so far is that we are looking at this particular component. The way that we're setting that up is right here. So I'm going to pull up in a comparison our app module. So this is the production module. And anyone who has worked with Angular 2 through 6 for any length of time has run into these. The modules are where we pull all our information together. It's how we register what needs to know about each other. It's how we import things from third-party libraries. It's how we pull everything together. Well, in our production app, the reason that router link works is because our module imported app routing module. This is a secondary custom module. It's a common pattern to separate these two. App routing module within it imported the router module. This is the part of Angular that allows us to do things like a router link. So in our production app, we have imported router module. So we need to do the same thing in our test. Fortunately, Angular provides quite a few utilities for testing. I'm not going to talk about all of them today, but I'm going to talk mostly about testbed. Testbed has a nice method called configure testing module, which enables us to configure our testing, configure our module, similar to how we would do it in production, but really just focus it on our test. So I can now, at this point, come over here, and just as I would do in a production ng module, I can say that I'm importing a router module. Now, I'm going to come back to you later why this is actually not the thing you're supposed to do and a few different ways to avoid it. But for the moment, let's see if that gets us any further with the test. So I saved it. It'll rerun. And we got further. So yay, making our way through. Completely different type of error now. So now this is an error that anyone who has done a lot of production development, particularly in a multi-module application, has run into something like this before. And in some ways, it's similar to the error we've just seen in that it's complaining that it doesn't know how to do something. But this error is complaining about our TypeScript code. It's not complaining about something in the HTML. So let's go take a look at that. It is saying that it cannot statically inject our HTTP client. All right, so let's take a look at the hero search component TS. All right, so the way injection works, dependency injection works in Angular, is that you define in your constructor for components, for injectables, for services, for some other things like that, you tell it what you want the dependency injection to go out and find. It can only find things that have been declared in your module. So it goes out there to find those things and injects them in for you. It's a singleton or whatever you have set up to inject it for you so that you don't have to create them manually yourself. But this is kind of weird. It's complaining that it can't find HTTP client. We never actually inject HTTP client into our component. That's what we're trying to test. That's where the problem is. So there's really two questions here. One, why does it complain about HTTP client? And two, why doesn't it complain about hero service? I'll take the second question first. So hero service, the reason it's not complaining about it is what I hinted at earlier. If I had done this talk a month ago when Angular 5 was out and Angular 6 wasn't, the behavior would have been different and this test would have failed differently. What happens in Angular 6 is they've added a new way of providing our services. It's here called injectable provided in. So as a contrast, I'll show the old way. Okay. So just removing the provided in there, and then we need to explicitly provide it in our app module. So with the old way, which is still completely legal, it's just the old way, we get an error message that makes a little bit more sense. It's complaining that hero search component can't find the hero service. So when we're trying to create our hero, let's open up the right file, hero search component, it was failing because hero service didn't exist, and I could have just provided it directly in. And provided it directly in this testing module as before. But we don't need to do that anymore. They've changed it. Well, we sometimes don't need to do that anymore. The default way of doing it is this now. You only need, you have the service provide itself. And this is kind of convenient for us. What it's doing is it's saying that we are going to provide this into the root of any module. Well, that includes this module here for testing. But I'm pretty sure that's not why they did that. That wasn't the motivation behind this change in Angular 6. The reason for this change was that it allows tree shaking. So I switched away from the screen sharing because I want to play with or talk with my hands here for a little bit. So just try to do a little bit of a metaphor here. Angular wants your applications to be as small as possible when you have them downloaded onto a browser. So the way that it works is they start at the base of your application, at your core module, and they look at everything that is directly referenced from your core module. And it tags all those things. And it says, OK, these are the things that I know about. These are the things that the application needs in order to be able to run. I need to keep those things. And then it looks at each of those things. Each of the fingers are there and says, all right, service or component or whatever you are, what are all the things that you need? OK, I'll expand my tree. These are the things that I need for that. and it goes out in all of these different branches and finds all of the things that the application needs in order to be able to run by default. Then when it's done and it has this tree, it metaphorically shakes the tree, and anything that is in your code or your third-party libraries that isn't directly referred to by this tree falls out and doesn't get bundled, doesn't get packaged. And so the only thing that gets sent to the browser for you is this smaller version that is all directly referenced. Now in Angular 5, we had our references to the services happening in the modules. So there was a direct link to each service, even if you weren't using the service. In Angular 6, you now have the option of saying, I'm pointing in the other direction. It will add it for you. And then if nothing actually uses that service, it won't be on the tree. When the tree shaking happens, that service will fall out and your bundle will be smaller. So that's why they did it. Usually, the recommendation is to use provided in root if anytime you can. You also can directly refer to the module that you might want to bring it into, but the recommendation is to use provided in root whenever you can, and that has the side effect of helping us with our test that we didn't have that failure. So that answers one of the two questions. Oh, I guess I should share my screen now again, now that I'm going to be touching the code. All right, so that is answers one of the questions, why we didn't have a problem with Hero Service. The first question I asked was, why do we have a problem with HTTP client? And that is because Hero Service provided itself for us by using this root provided in. But it uses in its constructor HTTP client. So everything that our service uses also needs to be provided somewhere. And HTTP client is not provided. It was not directly referenced. So we didn't. So the system is failing on that. So if we go back to our production code again and we look, the reason that our production code works with this is that we import HTTP client module. So again, like I imported router module, I will import HTTP client module. And again, this isn't exactly the right thing to do, and we'll come back to it. But if we can do that now, let's get the test running, and that test passes. We have gotten this test to the point that we can actually now run things. Except, as I said, this isn't really the right thing to do. The HTTP client module and the router module are production-only modules. Really, what you should do is make use of testing modules that the Angular team provided for us that provide a few extra utilities and also work in some cases that the other ones wouldn't. Let's see, I just have to put the word testing here in a few places to get this to work. For this really simple component, this really simple test, it doesn't really make that much of a difference for us, but there are tests that you can run into where it actually does make a difference. So don't just bring in the router module or HTTP client module, bring in the testing version of these. And with that, we've made one of the 3 tests pass. Any questions before I go on?
No, keep going. This is pretty cool.
Okay. Any questions from, I'm not going to follow the chat. Any question from chat that I should?
Don't worry, we have Corey Ryland in the chat.
Oh, yeah, well, Corey's got everything hanging under control. All right.
You guys, Corey's also an instructor. So hi, Corey. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat because Corey's also super smart.
Yeah. And Corey gave a great talk for ngHouston a couple months ago on RxJS and observables. I recommend that to my new coworkers and to people when I teach the class. If you're curious about RxJS and observables, go find his talk from a couple months ago on this.
It was a really good talk, and he's got a very good blog too. We love Corey. Don't let it go to your head, Corey.
So now I'm going to move on to the next one that was failing. So I'll get rid of that fdescribe. Let's see which one. I'm going to come to dashboard component last. So it's heroes component. That's the one that was failing next. Wow, I completely misspelled that, but it worked out. No, it didn't work out. Let's do that.
I don't know what's worse, when it works and you don't know why it works, or when it doesn't work and you don't know why.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to put the F on there. Again, this is exactly the same test as before. It just uses heroes component instead of hero search component because, again, this is just the default test that gets created. So this test fails, and hey, we solved this problem, haven't we? Can't bind a router link since it's not a known property of A. Let's go take a look at that here's component HTML. Oh yeah, router link, where is it? What line was it? There it is, line 15. We've already solved this problem. This is great. We don't need to worry about it now. We're starting to be able to build on our tools. So let's bring in the router testing module. Put it in the wrong spot. No, I did a period instead of a comma. All right, so let's see what the next thing is. All right, exact same error. HTTP client. All right, I shouldn't have deleted some of those things because we ended up needing them. This is great. You know, we're building on things that we've already learned to be able to go again. Let's see the next one. See if it's as helpful. No, that just succeeded immediately. Wait, did that? I thought I would have another problem here. Let me just make it. Take a look at it. That is interesting.
Because it works or it doesn't work?
It did not work last week.
What did you do? Is it because Angular 6, or were you using Angular 5 last week?
I was using Angular 6 last week.
Live debugging. That's always fun.
Yeah. This is very interesting. Well, okay. Let me see what's actually going on here. Okay, so it says it's happy here. Deprecation fit. Okay, it's just complaining about fit and fdescribe because if you use, basically it's saying if you commit with those, that you're actually excluding some of your tests and it's not going to be happy, which makes some sense. So let's see, hero services being brought in. I know why. I forgot to say one of the things I wanted to say with hero search component. So let's go back to hero search component. I left that one too early. Sorry about this. All right. So we had this pass with the hero service. Just as a refresher, I had to explicitly add something for HTTP client because my dependency had a dependency. You might have wondered why I don't need to add something for message service. That's because message service, when we look at it, it provides itself. So we don't need it there. So that's great. You know, we don't need a message service there. So this test pass, as I showed, I'm actually not happy with it. And I just forgot about that and moved on past it a little too early. I had to change my code here because of a dependency of my dependency. This is supposed to be the test for hero search component. It's not supposed to be a test that cares anything about hero service. The implementation of hero service, the fact that hero service uses HTTP client, it's really not something that my test should know about. So I don't want that to be in here. I got it working with HTTP client testing module. That absolutely did work. But I don't want this to be the way it works. I don't want to take advantage of this being provided in root here necessarily. Because I don't want to depend on these just by luck and have these dependencies out there. What I want to do instead is provide my own fake version of hero service. So what would that look like? So to provide hero service on its own, if I really wanted to just provide the basic one, that is what it would be. That is similar to what we've seen in production versions of this, production modules. But this is really, it's just going to bring in hero service. It says, hey, module, when you're, I'm setting you up so that when you're injecting anything, if you need hero service, use the normal hero service. I want to use something different. And there's another form of what the providers array can take that is useful to us here. So I'm going to say, I want to provide a replacement for hero service. So when you run into a constructor that takes hero service, do this instead. I want you to use a specific value. I want you to use a spy hero service that I'm going to create for you. So I am going to make use of something in Jasmine that is really nice. I'm going to create a spy object. Now, whenever hero service is injected, it's not going to inject the real one. I'm going to replace this spy object in there. There are other things besides use value. There's use class. There's a few other things kind of beyond the scope of all the different options. I'm just creating the spy object. So let's see. I need to get it to run this test. I had moved on too quickly. Okay, let's see the test run. All right, I need to force it to run again because it ran in the middle.
Hey, while you're doing that, say hello to Corey. He just crashed your party.
Hey, Corey.
Hey,
welcome.
You've asked lots of questions. I actually have one.
Oh, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess a question about the spy objects. My testing skills are not super great. So with this Jasmine spy objects, do you recommend those for like the majority of your mocks when you're testing? Or is it better to use just like generic like classes when you're mocking?
I tend to use spy objects because of some stuff that I'll show a bit later. It depends. The nice thing about a spy object is there are actually 4 different versions of it, of this constructor, but a couple of them are parameterized, so it's a spy object of the thing that you're loading. So I can put in here that I'm doing a spy object of hero service. And then what this creates, I create a constant here. What this creates is a spy object of hero service. And so now downstream, when I want to use this, it automatically knows about, I can treat it both as a spy and as the service itself. And you can, for simple cases, you can create your own objects and pass them in. But I often find I end up wanting to have all these capabilities anyway, so I pretty much kind of default to them. If it's just like a config object that I'm passing in, I won't bother doing this. But if it's something that, it's a service that I'm going to be calling, then I would do it. So, it's in between. Like, I'm doing a lot of work these days with some like modal libraries, and sometimes they have really big config objects that you pass in, and those get kind of ugly. I wouldn't use a spy object for that because it's not the shape of the type of thing that I want, because it's not actually going to call any functions on that. Use a spy object when you want something to be injected into your system where methods are going to be called on that object.
Okay, yeah, that's really cool. I didn't even know that the create spy object took a generic type.
Yeah,
I didn't know that was even there. That's really cool.
Yeah. There's, as I mentioned, there's several different versions of it. So you can give it a base name, which is, I don't really know why you would do that. I think maybe it shows it a little bit in your error logging. But for the important thing is that the method name array that you're passing in, this is really just an array of the method names, the method name array that you're passing in, and then the optional generic tag. Cool. All right. So anyway, so now I have the hero search component passing, and I'm happier with it than I was with the version before that was passing, because I have removed that transitive dependency. All right. So now that I've done that, I'm going to move on again. So I'll move on to the hero spec test. I don't want to bring in the HTTP client module because that is that other dependency. I'm going to bring in the service spy because I know I'm going to need that because I've already seen that information. So let's bring that in. Okay, I don't want to run that test. I want to run this test, and it's unhappy with me because I haven't told it what hero service is. So now everything should be compiling, and now we should run heroes component test, and we will see where we end up. And we end up with a failure. And this failure I'm not happy with. The previous failures told me that it's a problem with injection, or that it's a specific line in the HTML. This is a really unhelpful error, and I don't know if who could, if anyone, make it better. And unfortunately, it's the same thing whether you're looking in the browser window that Karma creates, or Karma launches, or in the console. It's just object error thrown. Great, that doesn't tell me anything. So what you need to do when that happens is you just need to look at your code. This particular error does mean that it's a problem in the TS. Unfortunately, I've looked through this enough that I've figured out what the problem is. The cool thing that this approach to testing does is that it's not just running the TS. Like on this test and the previous test, we had a failure in our test because of something that was in the template file that was in the HTML. Another implication of that is that it's not just running the constructor. It's not just creating our component. It's actually running the full life cycle for us. Using this approach to compile your component and get a fixture allows you to set things up later to do things with, to test ngOn changes and all those things. In our particular case, what's happening is that it's running ngOn init. Not very exciting. It just runs get heroes. Look at get heroes. It does something on the hero service. Now, it's not using the real hero service. This is why I was surprised when it passed earlier. The real hero service didn't have the problem that I'm trying to expose right here. But the spy, which helps us by eliminating a transitive dependency, doesn't have as much information yet. I'm going to add a couple console logs here so that we can see what we're actually getting. So, and unfortunately, these console logs just do not show up in the browser. So I do have to look in the console. All right. So what it says, the service is, it's just an object with a constructor. Doesn't really have anything else. And the function is created, but it doesn't. Did I do that right? No. Haha. There we go. I did the wrong thing. It was calling the wrong function. The function that gets created actually is undefined. That's the source of this error. I have put in a spy object and told it, I want you in your life cycle to run this spy object and to call a function on the hero service that doesn't exist. So we need to improve that. We need to have the spy object know about that function. Unfortunately, this create spy object makes that really easy. Just put in here, you're going to have a function called getHeroes. And so now let's see if we get further. Now we still have an error. The function exists now, but we still have an error. And so let's see what actually happened here. What was the result of calling that function? So as we called the result, oh, the function doesn't do anything. So that's the reason we're running into a problem. In the production code here, we call on the service getHeroes, and then we do something with it. getHeroes normally returns an observable, and we subscribe to it and get the information out of it. Well, we're subscribing to undefined. Angular can't handle that. TypeScript can't handle that. So we're running into a problem. So we need to create, we need to tell our spy, actually do something with this. That this function is something that we can actually use. And fortunately, Jasmine makes that pretty easy. So I want to say service spy getHeroes, and these functions here type IntelliSense works because of the parameter that the generic that I put up there. It knows about getHeroes. You can say getHeroes, I want you to return a value of an observable like that. Now, I'm not going to go too much into how observables work. If you're, as I said, Corey has a great talk on this before, but of will just create a tiny observable for us that only returns one value. In this case, it's just going to return an empty array because that's, this observable for real returns an array. So the syntax here is kind of weird, the dot and dot, and it's so that you can chain these things together. I'm telling this, I want to return this particular value. There's other things you can do here. You can throw an error. You can have it, you can fully implement a function in here so that depending upon the value that might get called, or under certain circumstances, that it might do completely different things. You have really all the power that you need to give whatever implementation you need to. But for my case, I just needed it to pass. I just needed it to be able to get to the point that subscribe was calling something real, and it called heroes and this heroes, and we're done.
You just solved my problem I ran into like a week ago, and I could not figure it out. I ran into that same error message. I had no idea what to do. Now I need to go back to my code.
Nice. So that is the end for test file number 2. Are we ready to move on to test file number 3, or are there other questions first?
We're ready.
All right. So I'm going to remove the fdescribe here, and I'm going to go over to the dashboard component spec. And I want to only run this. Actually, I don't even need to do that because I know this is now only the one test that's failing. So let's see. When it failed, hey, by now, this kind of feels like an old friend. Router link. Can't find a router link because it's not a known property of A. Know exactly what to do with this. So I'm going to grab from here my import. Let's run this test again. All right, now we have a different error. So this is kind of like the router link error that we saw before. Except it's not a problem of something that Angular gave us. It's a problem of something that we gave us. We're using subcomponents within our dashboard. And our module has no idea what that is. App Hero Search is not something that's built into HTML, and we haven't told our system what it is. So we need to fix it. So in order to fix it, we can look at what happened in the production module. In the production module, we had declared Hero Search component. So we can just declare that on our own in here and move on. All right, HTTP client. We've seen this error before. We know this error. And we want to see how complicated this is going to be. Oh, an ng on init. It calls get heroes, so we need to do all these same things again. Fortunately, I can just copy this exactly and put it in here. You might also, if you have a service like this that is used in a whole bunch of different places, you might inject it in such a way that all of your tests automatically get it injected. If you have just a file that is run as part of Karma and you just have a before each that isn't in any describe, it'll be executed before all of your tests. And so you could theoretically provide a spy like this for all of your tests and then just override it when you need to. So yeah, that can be kind of nice. But in our case, I just want to do this. All right, test pass. We learned something new here. We learned for this one that we needed to declare another test. So on one level, we are done. But I'm not happy. So one reason I'm not happy is we are now declaring a Hero Search component because it was declared here. What if Hero Search component itself was a complicated component that had a bunch of different other dependent components in it? Theoretically, we might have to come in here and put in a bunch of different declarations for a whole bunch of different things. We might have to, like copy this whole array or most of it and put it in here. We don't want to do that. So fortunately, Angular, and this is a production thing, but it's really used, I think, more often in testing. Angular provides something that lets us get away with that without having to have all of those things done. So it's another thing in here as part of our module building. We have schemas. And so we can do with the schema. Let me just take a look at something for a sec. All right, so we can do the schema that is called custom element schema. And this is a special thing in Angular that basically says if you find any elements in your HTML that have a dash in them, just ignore them, because no HTML element is going to have a hyphen in it. Something that looks like this is absolutely not part of HTML. And so by putting custom element schema in here, we're saying, don't worry about those things. Just ignore them. Don't throw any errors when you run into that. And that lets us still continue to pass without having to do all these transitive things. We can actually take it to another level as well. Similar, as I said, this filling here is similar to router link. We can actually get rid of router link in this as well. There's another one called no error schema. And if we have that in there, the errors like that router link will not be reported. This is basically saying don't give me any errors related to the HTML, to the template file. So it is available in production. You can use it in production. I think some people have good reasons to. I never have, but it is something that is there as an option. So I'm still not happy though. So you might think that all of this, this 40 minutes that I've been talking or whatever, seems like a lot of work in order to just write some small tests. And it really depends what type of tests you're writing. If all you really want to do is test this function, this is a lot of ceremony, a lot of overhead. Now, there are some circumstances where you absolutely need all this ceremony and overhead, or at least it provides you things. By compiling components and having the fixture, you have the ability to pass things in, to create full components in your test, to check the life cycle, to examine the DOM, to look at individual items, to make sure that if this input goes in, that this is the effect on the DOM, but if a different input goes in, there's a different effect to the DOM. If that is the level at which you're testing, and frankly, it's not a level at which I often test, all of this stuff is absolutely necessary. But let's say that's not what I'm testing. Let's say I'm just testing what this does here. And what this does is it takes in the array that we receive, and it ignores the first element, and then takes up the next up to 4 elements in it. So I want to use that. I want to have my hero, and I know the structure of this. I want to pass in 2 heroes. I want to pass in hero attaboy, and I want to pass in another hero called that's my girl. And so here, in addition to just checking to make sure that the component is created, which is really all this truthiness thing does, I can have another test. I could say, expect component heroes. So this is getting that result out and putting it on the heroes array to equal an array with just that's my girl, because we're skipping the first one and then taking the next few. And just to make sure, how does that work? That passes. I added another test, it passes. But as I hinted at before, if this truly is all I'm testing, I don't need anything that cares about the schema at all. I don't need any, it would be particularly bad if I still had my direct references to the other components and to the router testing module. But even having gotten rid of those, I still have these schemas in here to ignore having to deal with those. But I can get away from that when this is all I'm testing. One thing to remember about a component is that a component is injectable. Just as you write a test for a service that really only executes the code, you can treat your component as though it's a service. So a lot of the stuff in here that is component specific, we can get rid of it. So I can get rid of compile components. I can really get rid of all this. I can get rid of having this fixture up here. And I can get my component instance a different way. Instead of using the fixture, which, as I said, is useful for a lot of things I'm not caring about in this case, I can make use of another, there it is, it's right at the top, another method on the test bed to just get of the type. So this is basically just a hook into the injector that I've set up in my before each. I just want to get my component. I don't want to have all of these other things. Now, as I said, I'm treating it as a component, not as or as a service, not as a component. So I have to move where I provide it from a declaration to a provider. So I'm really just treating it as though it were just a service. Now I don't need this. Yeah, as I said, I don't need that. I don't need a lot of code. I can make things simpler. I came into this at the beginning by saying, I want to make these tests pass. And I handled the problem by making them bigger. But I could have gone in the other way too. Let's see if that works. And it doesn't. Nearly does, but it doesn't. And the reason is, we're never actually calling the code that I care about now. In the previous version, where I was loading it as a component and doing the full lifecycle and all of that, ngOnInit was being called for me. Now I need to manually call ngOnInit or get heroes in order to get this behavior. So I'll call ngOnInit here, and it passes. So because I don't need any of the features in this particular test that are component specific, I'm able to treat it like a service and make it simpler. But I can go one step further. Now, in this particular case, all I'm using the injector for is this hero service, which I've spied out. So I'm not really using the injector for anything else. Now, perhaps I have a modal service that I'm injecting, or a logging service, or whatever type of service that is not something specific here to what I need that I'm testing. You know, if there's a whole lot of services, then what I'm talking about next wouldn't apply. But in this particular case, really all I need in order to test this little bit of code is creating a dashboard component with a spied out hero service. I don't need any of that at all. I don't need the test bed at all. I can say component is a new component, a new dashboard component. Passing in the service spy. And here's now the advantage of using the spy. You know, this spy, as far as TypeScript knows, it's a hero service. And so this test passes as well with a lot less code. So you can build things up. I can even remove this async in here because I'm not doing anything async. You can build these things up from the default in order to get these to pass. But sometimes, if all you're really testing is a code, you can get them to pass by stripping out unnecessary stuff. And that is what I wanted to present.
I need to go rewrite a lot of tests now.
So, yeah, I do actually have one other thing. Let me get the right browser. There we go. So if anyone is interested in seeing these steps and not having to watch it again, with a slightly older version of Angular, so one of the RCs, I went through these steps. And so there are different branches to show different options. So you can come here. Perhaps Bonnie can put this link in the notes, but this link gives some branches to be able to see, you know, the change going through, you know, what I actually did when I presented this talk last week here locally, and then also adding the custom elements schema. So if you can go through step by step and see some of the changes and what they take, or watch the video as many times as you need to, because it's such an awesome video, I'm sure. But yeah, that is what I wanted to present.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that. Drop-ins. I said that on Twitter. I said if you want to find out the differences between dependency injection testing between version 5 and version 6, then come check us out. And Lance Finney is dropping some serious knowledge on us right now. So thank you very much for dropping serious knowledge on us. And I don't think we have a speaker lined up currently for next week. So just watch our Twitter and come and join us. Well, you can watch our Slack channel, but everybody else, watch our Twitter and sign up on ngHouston to get all the next coming up episodes.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, Lance. That was a really good demo. I really liked it.
All right,
Thank you.
All right, we'll see y'all next week.
Bye.